For over a century, the U.S. government took Native American children away from their families and tried to erase who they were. It started in the late 1800s. Government officials and missionaries believed Native people had to be civilized. To do that, they set up boarding schools designed to strip away Native identity. In the early 1900s, the U.S. government created the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Its goal was to make Native Americans more like white Americans. The BIA worked with churches and charities to run boarding schools. They were often hundreds of miles away from home. Children were forced to leave their families and go there. When they arrived, they had their hair cut. They were given English names. They were banned from speaking their own languages. They were told their culture was savage. Their religion was wrong. Their families were backward. Basically, they were told everything about who they were was bad. If they didn't like it, they could always go home. But that was almost impossible because the schools were so far away. Most students couldn't even visit their families once a year. Sometimes they weren't allowed to receive visitors at all. Now, if they tried to leave without permission, they would be punished severely. They'd get beatings, isolation, or worse. The punishments varied by school, but the policy was always the same. Obedience equals reward. Defiance equals punishment. And if they ran away, they'd be punished severely. At some schools, they might get a spanking. At others, they might be chained up. And at some, they were killed. Yes, some Native American children were shot trying to escape their schools. Children were also abused in other ways. Many were abused physically, emotionally, and even sexually. They were taught to hate their appearance, to hate their culture, to hate who they were. After all, their parents were called uncivilized. Their traditions were called savage. And their spirituality was called a religion of heathens. So what were they supposed to think? At the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, kids were forced to march barefoot 80 miles to make it seem like they were escaping. Then they were punished severely when they returned. And at the Sherman Institute in California, boys were forced to sleep while standing in military formation. They weren't allowed to sit down until morning. Dozens died of exhaustion. At most of these schools, students were put to work. They cleaned buildings, cooked meals, and did laundry. They were also taught trades like sewing and carpentry. But they didn't get paid for their work. It was seen as punishment, and if they weren't working, they were punished too. They were told they had to earn the right to play. This was supposed to teach them discipline. Instead, it broke their spirits. And that's exactly what the U.S. government wanted. Their goal was to kill the Native American identity. They called it the kill the Indian, save the man approach. Let me say that again. Kill the Indian, save the man. This wasn't ancient history. This happened in the 20th century. The last federally run boarding school in the U.S. closed in the 1990s. That means survivors are still alive today. Many have shared their stories. They talk about the pain, the silence, the lifelong trauma. It's important to remember that children were taken from their families for over 100 years. That's 100 years of stolen lives, 100 years of lost languages, 100 years of silenced cultures. And that's why today, many Native communities are still trying to recover what was stolen. In recent years, investigations have started to uncover graves near former boarding schools. Each one is a reminder of a child who never got to grow up. A child taken by force, a child erased from their own culture. And for decades, most Americans never heard about any of this. It wasn't in school textbooks, it wasn't on the news. It was buried, like the children themselves. Only now is the truth beginning to come out. In 2021, the U.S. government formally apologized for the boarding schools. A report was written about what happened. But for many families, justice still feels far away. It's hard to imagine the pain of losing your child, of not knowing what happened to them, of watching them become a stranger. And it's harder still to imagine that this was allowed to happen, in plain sight, for generations. And it's hardest of all to understand why. Why would the U.S. government do this to Native American children? Well, it all comes down to one word: control. The government wanted to control Native Americans. They wanted to take away their culture so they could take away their land. That's why the U.S. government apologized only to Native American tribes, and that's why we should all remember this dark chapter of history. It's easy to look back and call the people who ran these schools monsters, but remember, they had help. They had the support of the U.S. government. So ask yourself this: how many voices were silenced before anyone finally listened?